Arav was 12 when he began to understand what love truly meant. Not the kind from books or fairy tales, but the kind that wrapped itself around your everyday life so tightly, you didn't even realize it was love until it was tested. He lived in a small rented room with his mother, Mira, in a quiet corner of the city. The world outside was big, confusing, and often harsh, but inside that room, life was warm. His mother was his best friend, teacher, and safe place. She didn't have much to offer him materially, but she gave him all she had: her time, her laughter, her voice when she read stories to him every night. Mornings were his favorite. The smell of ginger tea, her soft singing in the kitchen, and the familiar clinking of utensils became the soundtrack of his childhood. She walked him to school every day, holding his hand tightly as they crossed the busy road, sometimes slipping an extra boiled sweet into his pocket, just in case you get hungry. Arav never questioned where she got the energy. She worked as a tailor from home, taking small orders to stitch blouses and mend torn clothes for neighbors. She rarely rested. When she did, it was only after making sure Arav's homework was complete, his uniform washed, and dinner ready. He noticed little things early on. How her hands were always rough from too much washing, how her back hurt when she bent for too long, how her smile faltered at the end of a long day. But she never let him worry. Her voice was always full of cheer. "We're doing just fine, baby," she'd say whenever he looked concerned. To him, she was magic, someone who could fix anything with just her presence. Every night, Arav lay beside her, waiting for the lights to dim so she could start her stories. She had a way of telling tales about brave kings and wise queens, clever animals and loyal friends. But even in those fictional worlds, Arav heard her truths about kindness, courage, sacrifice, and hope. He never noticed that most of those stories were about people making do with very little but loving a lot. What he didn't yet realize was how much she was sacrificing behind the scenes. Rent had gone up again, and she had stopped buying fruit to save money. She'd started skipping meals when he wasn't watching, lying about eating at a neighbor's house. He was too young to see the whole picture, but old enough to sense when something wasn't quite right. He started asking fewer questions when she came home later than usual, or when she said her stomach hurt but brushed it off. Still, in his eyes, everything was perfect because she was there. Her presence was the constant in his life, like the moon in the night sky. And even though they didn't have much, Arav felt rich, because love, he thought, was being wrapped in her old shawl on winter nights, was the kiss on his forehead before exams, was her whispering, "I'm proud of you," even when he just helped carry groceries. It started with a cough, dry, short, and too frequent to ignore. At first, Mira laughed it off, blaming the changing weather. Arav believed her. He had no reason not to. But soon the cough worsened, and her voice began to fade. She'd pause mid-sentence, catch her breath, and continue like nothing happened. She stopped singing in the mornings. Her tea remained half-finished on the counter. Something was wrong, and Arav could feel it in the silence between her sentences. She began waking up later, sometimes struggling to stand. Her stitching orders slowed down. She told clients to return in a week instead of a day. When Arav asked, she smiled faintly and said she was just tired. But the boy who used to believe in bedtime stories now noticed the truth hiding behind her eyes. One day, while walking home, he heard her speaking to a neighbor, low, careful words about hospital visits, tests, and money she didn't have. That night, she said she had a headache and lay down early. He didn't sleep. He sat beside her, listening to her breathe, counting the seconds between each cough. A week later, everything shifted. Arav came home from school, hungry and excited to tell her about a drawing competition he'd won. But the room was quiet. No tea. No music. He found her collapsed near the stove. Panic took over. He ran to the landlord, who called a rickshaw and rushed her to the local clinic. He sat in a plastic chair, gripping the drawing in his pocket like a lucky charm, trying not to cry. The doctor told him she was severely anemic and her lungs were weak. Years of overwork and malnutrition had taken a toll. She needed rest, proper care, and regular medicine. They admitted her for observation. Arav stayed by her side, refusing to leave. He watched the nurse place N4 into her thin arm and felt anger rise for the first time. Not at her, not at the world, but at his own helplessness. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "You're here," she whispered. He nodded, pretending to be brave. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "Everything will be fine." That night, he sat beside her bed, staring at the ceiling fan. For the first time, he realized the fragility of everything he had taken for granted. The woman who had been his strength needed someone to be hers now. He didn't understand medical reports or health charts, but he understood one thing: she was all he had. And if love meant anything, it meant doing whatever it took to keep her with him. The hospital stay lasted 3 days. He hated every second of being away from home, but he never once left her side. When they returned, everything felt different. She walked slower. She laughed less. But she was there. And that, for Arav, was reason enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could still be okay. Back home, the house felt heavier. Mira's energy was different. She moved less, spoke softer, and avoided talking about her health. Arav noticed everything. He saw how she'd sit longer between tasks, how she'd hold the wall before standing up. He knew things couldn't go back to how they were, so he decided to change. He started waking up early to make his own breakfast. It wasn't perfect, burnt toast, salty tea, but he was learning. He cleaned dishes, folded clothes, and began memorizing the medicines she needed. He stopped asking for things. No new shoes, no extra notebooks, not even pocket money. He walked instead of taking the bus. Every rupee counted now. Some afternoons, he helped a fruit vendor arrange crates just to earn a few coins. When neighbors asked about his mother, he smiled and said she was fine. At school, he focused harder, worked in silence, and used the library to avoid spending money on books. He'd sit next to her every evening, reading out loud from whatever he brought home: science chapters, moral stories, even jokes. Sometimes she'd laugh, sometimes just listen. But her eyes would always stay fixed on him, full of quiet pride. Over time, Arav developed a routine. He'd return from school, change clothes, heat leftovers, help her take medicine, finish homework, and sleep beside her. The rhythm became comforting. He didn't complain, didn't cry. He just adapted. She noticed. One evening, she touched his head gently and said, "You've grown up too fast." He didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. He just leaned into her hand and stayed there. He began managing small finances. He'd compare prices, bargain quietly, and bring receipts home. If relatives visited, he made tea and handled conversations so she could rest. In his heart, he carried one unshakable thought: he couldn't lose her. Not to sickness, not to struggle, not to fate. So he poured himself into every small act of care. He became her reminder for medicine, her walking stick when she felt weak, her warmth when the nights were cold. His body was still a child's, but his soul had aged beyond his years. Despite the pressure, he didn't let go of dreams. He still studied late into the night. He wanted to be a doctor, not just because it sounded noble, but because he had lived through helplessness. He knew what it meant to sit beside someone and not know how to fix them. He had seen pain from the front row and decided that one day, no one he loved would suffer without help. That became his silent promise. The boy who once relied on bedtime stories was now the author of his own chapter, one filled with quiet strength, daily sacrifice, and a kind of love that asked for nothing in return. He no longer wished for toys or birthdays. His only wish was that she stay with him, just long enough to see the man he would one day become. Months passed, and slowly, Mira's strength began to return, not fully, but enough to sit up longer, speak more often, and even stitch a few clothes when her body allowed. Arav stayed consistent. He never eased up, never acted like life had gone back to normal. He treated every day like it mattered, every moment like it was borrowed. He became sharper, faster, more aware of details, medicine schedules, nutrition charts, even household expenses. The neighbors began to talk, not out of pity, but admiration. A few of them told his story to a local community center, and one evening a representative came knocking with a food basket and an offer: help with school fees through a scholarship program. Arav didn't say much, but his mother cried quietly behind the door after they left. He took that opportunity and built on it. He joined classes after school, studied harder, and even tutored younger kids for extra money. His days were packed but never felt wasted. Mira encouraged him gently, never asking him to slow down, though he could tell it hurt her to see her son carry such weight. But he didn't complain. He reminded her every chance he got, "I'm doing this for us." 3 years went by like this. Arav turned 15 with little fanfare, but quiet progress. His results kept improving, his confidence grew, and soon he was applying for a city-level scholarship to pursue science at a reputed school. The interview panel asked him about his inspiration. He didn't prepare a speech. He simply said, "My mother. She made the impossible feel normal." The judges didn't need more. He got in. With that, things began to shift. More help came in. Donations from silent supporters. A new mattress. A proper table to study on. Mira no longer needed to worry about food or medicine. Arav had created stability where once there was only survival. And yet, his habits never changed. He still made her tea, still sat beside her every evening, still asked how she was feeling, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. Their bond had grown deeper with every hardship. Years later, Arav stood in a white coat, name badge pinned neatly, waiting for his turn to speak at a medical conference. His hands didn't shake. He wasn't nervous. He looked out into the crowd and saw her. Older now, thinner, but smiling the same way she used to when he brought home school drawings. When his name was called, he walked to the podium and spoke clearly. "I became a doctor not because I wanted a title, but because I lived with someone whose pain taught me more than any book could. My mother didn't just raise me. She built me cell by cell." The audience clapped, but his eyes stayed locked on hers. And in that moment, he didn't feel like the boy who once burned toast or feared losing her. He felt like a man who had kept his promise. Love for him was never dramatic. It was quiet, constant, and rooted in every sacrifice they had shared. He had given her back what she once gave him, a future.